Welcome to the Fantasy Football Hub YouTube channel. Today I am joined by the big man Bakar for a massive video. Double Game Week 32 is upon us, potentially the biggest game week left of this season in terms of decision making. There's so much strategy to talk about, best players of course, but triple captain, bench boost, they're all in play. It's going to be very interesting to see what Bakar is doing, and it's perfect to have you on this week, mate, to hear your tips and advice. How are you doing? And what are your thoughts overall on this game week?
Hello, Jack. Thanks for having me. Hello, welcome to all the listening viewers. It feels like a fairly pivotal period of the season with the back-to-back doubles coming up and then a big blank in Game Week 34. So, for example, someone like me who used the wild card a couple of weeks ago, it's gone all right, but I think this is actually the time where I've got to make ground with the doubles in play, especially with 3 chips in hand. I have the free hit chip, the triple captain chip, and the bench boost chip at my disposal. And I think I will be using each of the 3 chips in the next 3 weeks. So feels like a make or break point in the season.
Okay, lots to talk about. Let's start by actually just talking about chip strategy right away. Then we'll get into your team, because I think that is the most pressing issue this week for people watching right now. Which chip do I use this week if you have chips left? Even if you don't have certain chips left. For example, I've only got bench boost left. It's a bit of a decision whether to use it in 32 or 33, or perhaps even wait. So can you just run through the scenarios, talking about individual players as well, because of course for a chip like triple captain, that comes down to one individual. Just explaining what you think certain managers in certain positions should do.
All right, so I'll run you through each of the chips that I spoke about one by one. Coming to the free hit chip, I think for most managers who wildcard in Game Week 31, they've loaded up on teams that are doubling in 32 and 33, especially the 33 ones, teams like Palace, Bournemouth, Manchester City, and Aston Villa. And the thing is that the teams that are doubling in 33 are going to blank in 34, which is why I feel as if 34 is likely to be a very natural free hit chip for people who wildcarded in 31. Without overcomplicating things, I think 34 should be a free hit chip for most. Now, coming to the bench boost and triple captain, I think this is where there is no sort of correct black and white week where you can identify that this is the week to play the bench boost and this is the week to play the triple captain. Now I'll explain why. So coming to the triple captain, in isolation, when I sort of come to think of it, I think that of the realistic options that we have available, you look at the next 2 weeks, for example, you see that Isak is playing United at home this week and Crystal Palace at home this week, and he's now sort of back from injury. Then there's Saka next week, which Arsenal have a double, and Saka is going to be playing Ipswich and Crystal Palace. Similarly, Marmoush is going to be playing Everton and Aston Villa. So these are the 3 realistic options that come to mind. I think Isak is the one I would think would be the best sort of triple captain to use, because he appears to be the safest for minutes with sort of no concerns over his fitness at this point. And he's the talisman of the team. And Newcastle have 2 good fixtures against United and Palace. So you would expect, Isak to get out of those 2 games with, somewhere between 12 to 13 points minimum. While with Saka, the thing is that, especially after Arsenal's result against Madrid, I think their season is pretty much done in the Premier League. They have nothing to play for, and their whole sort of focus is going to be on that fixture against Bernabeu. Now, the fixture against Ipswich is immediately after that, so I'm not exactly sure how much effort they're going to put into it. They might be sort of tired after playing at the Bernabeu, and they might sort of win 1 or 2-0 and be happy with it, as they usually are. So I'm not exactly looking at Saka as someone who's going to be a very, very explosive triple captaincy option, which is something you want from your triple captain. And similarly with Marmoush, I'm not fully sure whether he's on penalties. And the fixture against Everton away is one which, again, doesn't appear to be a very high scoring one either. It's probably going to be a 0-0 or 1-0 either way. So looking at those fixtures alone, I think Isak appears to be the safest option on paper. I still don't think he is, just because Isak is the best sort of triple captain, you should automatically default to using the triple captaincy chip this week and using the bench boost in 33. Now I'll explain why. So for example, for teams who wildcarded in, let's say, 30, 31, a lot of teams have, let's say, the likes of Pope and Henderson, and they've sort of by default set themselves up for the bench boost in 32. Similarly, they have the likes of Estupinan, Dunk against Leicester this week, João Pedro against Leicester, Neco Williams at home to Everton. Now, these are the kind of teams which have, set up specifically to bench boost in 32. If they now look at, how things are, and they decide that, okay, Isak is the best triple captain, we can bench boost in 33. I'm not sure that would work best for their team, because their team is not exactly well set up for it, because they've primarily just made their bed, and they should actually now just bench boost in 32. Even if it means, let's say, selling a Gabriel for someone like an Estupinan or Dunk, if let's say they have Pope and the other doublers. I think these kind of teams should potentially use the triple captain next week on Saka or Marmoush, and they should bench boost this week. While on the other hand, if you have a hybrid structure, for example, like my team. So when you look at my team, I specifically set myself up in Game Week 30 with a hybrid structure. Now, what I mean by hybrid structure is that I sort of went with a team which had the flexibility to bench boost in 32 or to bench boost in 33 if needed. So what I have in my team, for example, when you look at it, is I have double Villa defense, I have Martinez and Konza. Now, they're good options this week because they have Southampton at home, and then they have doubles next week. So even though the doubles aren't great on paper, by default, I'll get some extra points simply by fielding them. And then, the likes of Evan Nilsson. Evan Nilsson has Fulham at home this week. The next week he has, a double. Sorry, next week he has, next week he has Palace away, and then in 36 he might potentially have a double. So, I mean, my point is that Evan Nilsson can be played in each of the 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Double Palace defense is a good option. If I sell Gabriel for someone like a Diaz, I get an extra doubler next week. And if I decide why I'm leaning towards, bench boosting for my team next week in 33 and using the triple captaincy this week is because of three reasons. A, because I have a hybrid structure and I can afford to choose whoever I think the best triple captain is, which I think is Isak. Secondly, by giving myself another week of information, I can then decide who the best third city is, because I don't have a third city. I can then decide what to do with Saka. I can decide what to do with Watkins. I can decide, if I want someone like a Timber or a Kiwior, stuff like that. So by next week, a lot of new information will emerge. I will have a better idea of who the best Gabriel replacement is. Similarly, if I, for example, bench boost this week, I will probably be doing Gabriel to Stupinan to cash the Leicester fixture. But let's say if I was to bench boost next week, I'll be doing Gabriel to Ruben Diaz, which would give me an extra doubler by default. So I think looking at my team and the flexibility that I have with all these options, I think it makes most sense for me to triple captain this week and use the bench boost next week. But I would just, at the cost of repeating myself, just want to say that it's by no means the best strategy that people should follow who are listening. And it depends on each team. So, teams with double or triple Newcastle defense, or, a Neco and Dunk and Van Hecke. Van Hecke is actually suspended. Estupinan and João Pedro. These kind of players, they can choose to bench boost this week and use a triple captaincy later.
Yeah, it's very tough, isn't it? I think it is very team dependent. I know for my team, I've really set it up to bench boost this week, and it looks strong. I'm going to have to get a Gabriel replacement as well, which we'll talk about that in just a second. You've mentioned a couple of names just then, but I think if I had the triple captain, I think I would be on Isak this week. I think he is the best option that we have left. I agree with you. I think the fixtures for Saka in 33 are very, very strong. Palace at home and Ipswich away. But as you said, that Ipswich game is very soon after the Real Madrid game. I don't expect Saka to play at all, actually, against Brentford this week. We'll talk about him as well, just a little bit, get your thoughts on him this week in particular. But I think he'd be fully rested, then I don't see any reason why he wouldn't play the full game against Real Madrid. And then I think there's no reason to play him again, as you said. Like, Arteta's been acting as if the season is still on. Maybe it is. I don't really think it is, let's be completely honest. And after doing so well in that first leg, I think the priority has to be the Champions League now. So I think I would go for Isak. I also think in terms of his injuries, I think he's all right. He's always there's always going to be that doubt with him. He is pretty I guess he does pick up a lot of injuries in general, muscular injuries. Had that knock, but I think he'll play the majority of minutes over these 2 games. And just because he blanked in the last game doesn't mean that he's not in great form. So yeah, I think if I had both chips left, I would do this. I'm just looking at your bench boost for 33 though, and this is what you got to weigh up, because I think that as it stands, and you have transfers in the bank, obviously, to use, but you're bench boosting, and I'm only looking at sort of the single game week players here that would actually be on your bench. So your Gabriel replacement would be, say, Ruben Diaz. We'll talk about that in a second, as I said, but say him. So he goes into the team. So you're benching Konza, Livramento, maybe. Would he be transferred out? I'm not sure. Doubling goalkeeper is very good, and then maybe Murphy as well, or maybe Evan Nilsson. You know, it's not unbelievably good. Whereas if you compare it to sort of this week, arguably it's a little bit stronger. Maybe not. It's tough to know.
Yeah, I want to actually, I mean, it's an excellent question that you raise, and a lot of listeners will feel very similar when they look at their teams, and they'll face a very similar dilemma. I sort of want to run you through the pros and cons of bench boosting in either week. So, for example, if you're bench boosting this week, the trouble that you might face is potential rotation of the likes of Villa or Arsenal, depending on the Champions League results. So, in my team, for example, I'm not even 100% sure that Saliba would play. For example, if I hear news that he's benched before Brentford this week, I won't be totally shocked, right? It is that kind of week where Arsenal will rotate, right? But on the other hand, if you're bench boosting in 33, most people will be bench boosting a few Newcastle players to Aston Villa away, which again, like you mentioned, doesn't feel ideal. The likes of Livramento, for example, or Pope, or even Murphy, they don't exactly. It's not an ideal fixture to bench boost in. But waiting this week does get you an extra week of flexibility in getting, let's say, a Ruben Diaz, for example, as opposed to a Stupinan, which could work out because it gets you an extra doubler. And not only that, I think it also allows you to get the best triple captain out of the way as well.
Yeah.
So looking at the pros and cons, I think it's probably better to use it next week. Also, I forgot to mention that, yes, you mentioned that Aston Villa's double does not exactly look for defense. But I will get some points by getting that extra doubler out of Konza and Martinez just by fielding them by default. I'll at least get 4 or 5 points either way out of them. So while they may not appear to be the most outstanding options on paper, they're still gonna get me some additional points either way. Coming to my transfers for next week, I think if I use a triple captain this week, I can just easily save. I don't have to make a transfer. And that's the whole point of actually using the triple captaincy this week. I think with three free transfers next week, I can make a more informed decision about which doublers I want, which third City I want, which third Arsenal I want, for example, whether I want Rodgers, whether I want Watkins. These are things which are still not entirely clear for me. They're sort of up in the air. But if I was to, let's say, draw a roadmap of what my transfer would be, I think maybe Palmer to Saka, because Palmer has Fulham next week and Fulham away. Saka has a double, so I'd probably go with Saka. I think I would probably sell Gabriel for someone like a Ruben Diaz as well. And the third transfer could be maybe Isak to Watkins or Murphy to Rodgers, something like that, depending on whichever player's minutes look better. I think we can potentially just go for Murphy to Rodgers at this point, because I'm not entirely sure about Watkins right now. So maybe something like that, and that would give me Salah against Leicester, Palmer against that would give me Salah against Leicester, that would give me Isak against Villa, Livramento against Villa, and Martinez on the bench, which seems all right. It's not that bad.
No, you'd have Evan. You would have Evan Nilsson on the bench still. You can't just get him into the starting 11.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I forgot Evan Nilsson.
But
Evan Nilsson away to
it's
Palace.
strong for single game week.
That's still all right.
You do have the doubling keeper as well, which is something I don't have this week, which is big. I mean, keeper points are random. They are pretty random. They're hard to predict more than any other position, I'd say. So I think that's good to have a doubling keeper.
Yeah, 5 to 6 points from, let's say, Martinez, maybe a point from Livramento, maybe something from me. The good thing is that if I'm playing double Villa defense against Isak, I'm sort of hedging, and I'll probably get points either way, hopefully. So yeah, overall, I think it sort of puts me in a respectable position. I'm not sure whether it's the best bench boost that I can opt for, but I think it's respectable at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And your position, I would do the same. I think you raise a good point there. It's very dependent on who the individual players are in your team. Also, if you did have a plan when you wildcarded, or if you haven't wildcarded yet, then it's obviously different. But if you did have a plan and you wildcarded in 31, your team probably is decently set up still for the plan that you had in place. You might need to use a couple of transfers, but I think overall I look strong. Okay, I think that's good for sort of chip discussion for now. I think, as you said, free hit 34 is pretty obvious, especially if we're loading up on these players that are all going to blank. I mean, it seemed very obvious to me anyway. I mean, if I just go and look at your team for Game Week 34, I'll click Optimize down here. You are missing, well, you have 4 players. So it's going to be tough to get a good score that week. So if you're in that sort of position, I think free hit 34 makes sense. Let's talk about individual players now. So we've mentioned already Gabriel, and you've talked about a couple of potential replacements for him in Ruben Dias and Estupinian. Obviously, it depends on your strategy, as you've said. Let's just talk more generally about best defenders in the game right now. You have Saliba as well. If you didn't have any of those players and you were selling Gabriel either this week or next week, who would you be looking at?
I think this week, if you're bench boosting, I think Gabriel to Stupinan is a really strong transfer to make. You just simply look at the fixtures. Brighton have the best clean sheet probability odds this week, so you just probably just go with the Brighton defender. Similarly,
the thing is with that, like, I'm in this exact predicament, and I think I'm going to go for Ruben Dias, because then I get him for the week after as well, where he'll come into my team. So it's even that is team dependent.
I'll hold you over there, because let's say if you get Ruben Dias this week and you're using the bench boost this week, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Do you think Ruben Dias would fit into your 11 next week?
Because for me, he would.
Fit into my 11 next week.
Yeah, for you he wouldn't, but for me he would. This is the thing.
See, this is where it comes down to each specific team. For example, I have next week I'll have Saliba who's doubling, I'll have Guardiola who's doubling, and I'll have Konza who's doubling. Right. So there's no room for someone like Ruben Dias. For me, he's going to be on the bench.
Yeah.
Right. Or I guess I could just play him over Konza, but then again,
you don't need to do that,
I don't need to do that exactly, because I already have a doubling defender.
Yeah, whereas for me, as you mentioned before, like I have Neco Williams, I've got Trippier as well. So I just bench them and go for Ruben instead, I think. So again, like even that is team dependent. If you don't have Saliba, and you mentioned you wouldn't be shocked to see him benched this week, what do you think about his minutes over the next 3 Premier League games? Do you think he is the best Gabriel replacement if you don't have him already?
I think so, but we're sort of now nearing that point where I don't think I'd be buying him this week. Overall, let's say if I was to buy a defender next week, I might sort of opt for Saliba over Diaz, let's say if I didn't have Saliba. I do think that if you're buying one this week, then I think maybe Superman could work better. But then again, I sort of counter question that if you're buying Saliba this week, then you're also getting that extra fixture next week, and you're definitely going to be starting Saliba. So I might be wrong in preferring Stupinan over Saliba. So Saliba might actually be better, because you raise a good point that you're getting an extra doubler next week.
It just depends if he's going to play. Like, I don't know. I was looking through the Arsenal squad last night, and I was chatting to a few of my friends, and we couldn't quite work out who would come in for Saliba, because I think Timber is much more likely to be rotated. So I think if White came into the side, which I fully expect him to do against Brentford, I think he'll come in for Timber. Zinchenko could play instead of Miles Lewis-Skelly. Kivior as well. Like, you could argue that he is more likely to be rotated than Saliba because he's barely played this season. So I'm not actually sure who would come in for Saliba, unless they really do just throw the Premier League games and just do like a whole other 11. I don't think that's going to happen though.
I agree. I think I'd expect Timber to miss out this week. Maybe the left back as well, but I don't think the centre backs would be rotated. I think Kivior is another one I'm potentially looking at next week if I don't want Ruben Dias as well.
I mean, he's such a good price.
The thing with City is, Jack, that last week I was maybe looking at Savinho, but this week he didn't play at all. So X-Men's will always be a bit of a concern with Man City mids. I still sort of think that Savinho is the best of them all, but I won't be completely shocked to see him miss a fixture, which is where Ruben Dias does sort of come into play next week. And I think I'll take a call closer to the time. If I knew that Kivior is going to play most games from now on in, which I think he would, because he's done an all right job coming in for Gabriel. And Kivior could be someone potentially worth looking at. I think he's probably a better option than Timber at this point.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it was good yesterday as well, actually. I know he had a bit of a shaky start. A rough pass with his right foot. Maybe he should stick just to his left. But, I mean, he played well. So, I think, I don't know. I would expect him to play the majority of minutes. It's just like, at this stage of the season, you do not want to get a rotation risk when you've got all these games coming up. I mean, how nailed do you think Ruben is in that team? That's the question as well.
I think he's relatively nailed, but then again, if Akanji's back in 2, 3 weeks' time, he could be a problem. But he should be fine for the double, which is essentially what counts at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. And then you mentioned City players in general because obviously you have two Arsenal, two City. You're going to want to get probably another one or of their players. Savinho, people that have him, is he just an easy hold? Do you play him this week against Palace at home? Because a lot of people have deep benches. You, for example, you've got a benching headache. Huge benching headaches across your entire team. Really, I mean, Konza and Evan Nielsen they're gonna have to be benched. It looks like, unless you bench Marmoush.
Oh, no chance I do that. But that's the sort of, I wouldn't exactly call it risk, but that's something you just have to accept because if you're sort of setting yourself up with a deep bench for the bench boost, then inevitably you will end up in certain weeks without with points on the
Yeah.
bench. So it's all right. I don't think it's the end of the world. But yeah, coming to your question regarding Savinho, I think the thing that might sort of play into the hands of people who own him is the fact that City have a early kickoff this week, and I think you can just wait and take your decision after we know whether or not he's starting, because he's the kind of player who I would expect leaks for, because a lot of FPL managers own him at this point, and they'd be particularly keen. So it makes for a good sort of leak to gain engagements, I would have thought.
That's a very good point. I was thinking about that for the Arsenal game. The Ipswich game, I was like, I hope it's one of the first games. Sadly, it's not, which is a shame. Actually, no, it was at the Brentford game that's 5:30. I was like, well, if there's a leak there, it could be interesting. We mentioned Saka a little bit. What do you think? I've said what I think about his minutes this week. What do you think? Do you agree with that? Do you think he's... I mean, we'll wait and see now whether or not he's a good buy for Palmer in 33, but what about managers that have him already?
I think if you have him, you play him this week. I mean, even though there's a risk that
Really?
he's benched.
Ooh. With
I
a
don't know. I
deep
mean,
bench though, like you've got, I mean, like, so say you had Saka instead of Palmer, you'd be benching in your team Evan Nielsen to play Saka. That is tough.
not necessarily in my team, but let's say if someone has Saka and someone has
Okay.
Savinho. In that case, I think I would still lean towards the better player, right? It is tough though, and I'm not exactly sure what we're gonna get out of Arteta at the press conference either. So I think I'd probably lean towards playing him. But let's say if you have a reliable option like Evan Nelson, then maybe I would consider benching. But you know the risks with that though.
Let's talk about the other doubling team this week. We haven't even mentioned them because a lot of people are just already tripled up on Palace. But I need to mention them because they double this week. For those that aren't on Triple Palace already, I feel like if you're on Triple Palace, you just play them all and you see what happens, right? But if you're not on Triple Palace, who are the three that you would go for right now? Forget about sort of any other context. So sort of like this week and next week for the double. Who are the three you're picking?
Again, it comes down to team structure. I think I still prefer Eze and Sar for what they bring to the table. I mentioned this in the past as well. I don't think there's much between Henderson, Munoz, and Mateta. So even though Mateta's done well, in the likes of Evan Nelson have done similarly well, if not better.
They've done better. Yeah, it's 2 more goals in the last 2 weeks. That was a good move.
Exactly. I mean, I think Munoz, maybe I would probably go with Munoz, because with Gabriel sort of out the picture, there are not too many defenders that appeal at this point. When I wildcarded, I had double Arsenal defense, so there was no real urgent need to get Munoz, especially with Guardiola as well. But now I think that's changed, so you can perhaps pick someone like a Munoz. But I think ultimately most of us have triple Crystal Palace, and we should just hold whoever we own.
Then final team I want to talk about is Villa players, because they obviously play Southampton in a single game week this week, but then they have a double next week, one of just a few doubling teams next week. So people might be eyeing that up, thinking, right, let's get on them this week. They double next week. Obviously, the plum fixture this week, Southampton, who are now relegated, of course. However, they play PSG tonight at the time of recording. Then they'll play them again next Tuesday. The Southampton game's in the middle. And then it's the Newcastle game on the weekend. Then the City game midweek. A lot of fixtures. So what do you think about Villa players in general?
Then again, I think their minutes this week could be up in the air. Now, well, you look at someone like, let's say, Rogers. He looks like a fantastic option this week against Southampton, but I don't think I'd be going out of my way to buy him this week,
Okay.
because he could easily be subbed early even if he starts. I think the minutes could be a real concern for Villa players this week. And we saw that even someone nailed like Konza missed out last weekend, which just tells us that no one
Yeah.
is going to be safe. And now that Rodgers has actually started so many games, and let's say Villa are still in the contest after tonight's leg, then that Southampton game is at real risk for Villa players. And that's why I do feel as if this is a very tricky week to bench boost as well, with the minutes for Arsenal and Aston Villa looking murky in particular.
Yeah. It's very, very tough indeed to know what's going to happen, which is what I like. I like what you're saying in terms of, chip strategy, whatever. It might be slightly more optimal one week compared to the other, but you get a lot more info by waiting, which I think is a very, very good point. I don't really have that luxury. But there we go. Very good advice, Bakar, as always. I actually think that was probably one of our better videos this season. Let us know in the comments down below. I thought that was good. Like, that was some good info. And, I'm talking more about myself there. I was cooking. Bakar, you could improve next week, as could your rank, famously. But yeah, really good stuff, Bakar, as always. Very, very useful advice. Even for me, like I love chatting with people like Bakar about fantasy for my team because, I've got a big decision to make in terms of a Gabriel replacement for this week because I'm bench boosting. So that's very valuable information for me. Hope you guys got some value out of that as well. Let us know in the comments down below what you're doing, what your trip strategy is, what your transfers are going to be. Good luck this week, and we will catch you on the next one.